By the time we had reached 2004, there had been a rapid growth for transgender recognition in the media following the previous decade. As I have previously mentioned, we had in this time the coming out of Torai Masae and various celebrities, the legalization of sex reassignment surgery after a long hiatus, among other things leading to increased discussion going into the premiere of Kinpachi Sensei, a show that was very successful in increasing awareness and understanding for transgender people. Following this, successful campaigning and a growing momentum led to things such as the election of a trans councillor to a conservative ward in Tokyo and, importantly, the passing of legislation allowing the legal change of a person's gender under certain circumstances. It began to seem as though equality was beginning to be realised, though in reality we were still a long way from this being a reality. While we were beginning to see in these dramas and elsewhere transgender people who were visible, one problem could be seen in how they were being portrayed. Many of these people were being defined as a character or as a person by their transgender identity and not for being a person with various likes, dislikes, interests, problems that also just happen to identify as trans. A trans character could not be anything other than their identity, and their identity defined who their character was. Kinpachi Sensei had this situation where you had a character who shut themselves off from others and had trust issues with others due to their identity, and their entire character development focused around their identity of being transgender, with very little outside of this. While I do make this point, it would be unfair to assume this is an issue limited to Japan. In the West too, many transgender character portrayals are done entirely through the lens of a character being trans and being about their identity, not allowing the character to develop in the same way as other characters, while the fact remains that they also happen to identify as trans. And you get these examples where they're also handled in a very poor manner, with poor understanding leading to some quite negative results. Not naming any names, of course. But to focus on Japan, come 2004, we had a situation where discourse and discussion on trans rights was still present, but limited. So the next step in dialogue was an important one. Japanese variety programs have often sensationalized or acted poorly when trying to represent gender non-conformity. I touched on this slightly in the previous part of this series, with the mention of how early voices of the transgender movement came from within the bar culture or entertainment arenas, and I cited the Mr. Lady segment in Murate Itomo as part of this. Of course, this had the problem of treating them less as people and more as entertainment, with their identity being part of the gimmick that led to their success. This is, if I were to oversimplify the point I would like to make here, the main problem with variety TV for the LGBTQ community in general within Japan, not just for the trans community. In many ways, what variety TV does is simultaneously give LGBTQ people a voice by including them, but also hurting their cause by reinforcing stereotypes about the community, some positive, but mostly negative ones, and in turn reinforces the idea that these people were someone to be laughed at, not respected, or put on an equal footing to where they are themselves. As Justina Gorniak puts in their essay on the topic in 2015, which I will include linked with this video, they tackle the topic of LGBTQ representation in Japanese variety TV, where they note that Japanese variety TV features a representation of LGBTQ members which is clearly biased and missing certain types, strengthening the stereotypes towards the community. Two people I want to make particular note of as I point out these problems with the representation on variety TV are Haruna Ai, a transgender woman who won a transgender beauty pageant in 2009, and the more gender ambiguous Matsuko Deluxe, a generally outspoken TV personality who is also known for their cross-dressing and flamboyant personality. Both are quite popular, appearing often on TV, in advertising campaigns, and are generally accepted within the entertainment sphere. However, their appearance in entertainment is in some ways also a problem, as both portray a certain type of person within the LGBTQ community that fits with what a cis person would come to expect, fitting the older stereotypical views of the community. With Haruna Ai, they are the pretty transgender woman who sometimes, as she has put in her own words, used her manly side by speaking with a loud, hoarse voice to draw laughs, as someone with her beauty wouldn't be expected to act in this manner. With Matsuko Deluxe, there are many things that you would perhaps expect to be a hindrance to their popularity, since Japanese society has few plus-size TV personalities, never mind ones who are also cross-dressers. Matsuko Deluxe's image is almost the antithesis of what could be seen as the rigidness of Japanese society. The problem you have is they're defined by these differences, and because of this they don't get a chance to be portrayed as everyday people and as normal members of society, but instead as entities who are of entertainment value, as people who are amusing to view, but not people. And because it is why they are successful, they often play into this idea themselves for comedic effect. Even though both have appeared on shows to discuss current affairs on various degrees, able to give their own viewpoint like any other guest, as well as for some issues take from their own experience as being part of a sexual minority, they can also find themselves in shows where they use their status for comedy, and in turn this feeds into the problems mentioned where it strengthens stereotypes and can hinder social advancement on issues related to LGBTQ people. Both of their stories are accepted on Japanese TV because their stories are more palatable and stereotypical compared to others. And that can be shown by how and what isn't found on Japanese TV, such as the lack of female to male transgender personalities. Instead, the majority of LGBTQ representatives in variety TV more fit the same or similar mold to these two people. And it doesn't mean that this is necessarily all bad. It's all well and good to sit here and point out how stereotypical and skewed some representation is for trans people within variety TV, but you could still find reasoned debate happening all the same. In comparison, this is definitely less true of the type of variety programs found in, say, to use the two examples I am personally most comfortable comparing against due to familiarity, US and UK TV. When comparing the content of talk show or variety programs in these countries to Japan, it is in Japan where you could find more LGBTQ and specifically for this discussion trans role models on TV on at least a semi-regular basis, as well as discussion of topics about the situation for minorities. While in these other countries you may hear things about the rights of trans people, especially in the US, with the current attacks on trans rights being found in current American politics, the representation is different in Japan, where there is a discussion being held, and that has always been the case since especially the late 90s, on Japanese TV. When you pair this alongside documentaries on trans rights and general LGBT issues, in the NHK HeartNet TV series, for example, which is a documentary series that covers many topics which have impact on Japanese society, such as hikikomori, the discussion is being held on Japanese TV and it is involving trans people. This is one important consideration on the advancement since the passing of the legislation that allowed the legal change. Lots of debate had occurred prior to the passing of legislation, but this didn't end after it was passed either. The discussion did continue, including on TV, and role models did continue to appear. The issue therefore remained on people's minds, and even if legislative and legal progress stalled in the years following the 2004 bill, discussion kept transgender issues in the public light. And it wasn't just variety TV continuing the discussion throughout the early part of the millennia either. While Kinpachi Sensei had been an early example of a thoughtful take on the subject, though not the first, more television dramas took up the mantle of tackling the issue firsthand. And there are two of these that I'm going to have a focus on for the period prior to 2010, as I want to focus on the current situation and more current media later on, with the 2006 TV movie Watashi ga Watashi de aru Tame Ni being one, and the 2008 TV drama Last Friends being the other, and those two will be the main focus of this part of the discussion here. First things first, I'd like to discuss the aforementioned 2006 TV movie, however. The movie was part of a series of TV movies on a large variety of topics that aired between the end of 2005 until the end of 2006. The thing that is interesting about the story told within this 90-minute TV movie I'm talking about here is that it is telling a different story to the one told within contemporary debate or previous dramas on the subject. The story focused on a very traditional family unit coming to terms with the fact that what they thought was their son was now seeking approval from them as a woman, and about the everyday reminders that, despite legal advances and a growing acceptance, trans people can feel on a daily basis like they are discriminated or disliked by swathes of the public due to a lack of understanding, which is an important angle to tackle, as while legislation had helped trans people, it had taken some momentum out of the transgender movement in the mainstream, despite the fact it was still very much needed with the lack of legal representation that they still had. The start of the movie, I feel, frames the situation for trans people at the time well. Asahina Hikaru is a trans woman, the one who has currently not gone through any sort of medical transition and is still listed as male on the family register. In the early moments of the film, some men attack her while walking late at night with someone, who then find out that they are trans while attacking her and are revolted by this idea. "Ooh, a man!" they shout. "Creep," they're called. And the attack sends them to hospital. As well, despite the ability to change legal gender now, people who are currently within transition, or maybe don't want to fully transition, have seen no improvement in legal representation, and Hikaru finds herself in that limbo where she's been offered hormones at the hospital but has not actually taken any yet, and has also not decided whether to have surgery later on, which would be required for a legal gender change, reeling at the cost being 1.5 million yen. It should be pointed out as well that sex reassignment surgery, even today, isn't covered by any medical insurance in Japan, so anyone requesting this surgery would have to pay out of pocket in full. All of this leaves people in Hikaru's situation in a difficult position. They're still unrepresented by the law in Japan, and the start of the movie hammers this point home. Hikaru's family are unaware of them being trans, besides their sister, and when they decide to visit home, there is an initial surprise on her mother's face before they treat her perfectly normally following that. However, it is following that when she welcomes her father home, who ignores her at first, gets angry at the table while eating, questioning what they're wearing and pointing out that, "You're a boy, what are you doing?" Just prior to this scene, you'd seen him working and thinking back to a childhood memory of playing catch with Hikaru, and the impression given is that they'd been really looking forward to seeing their son after so long, and doesn't understand why a daughter has returned. The rest of the film focuses on the family coming to terms with their daughter's situation and other challenges, such as when they applied for work and their application noted that they were transgender and their legal gender was different, though the boss immediately dispenses with the application as not wanting any pervert working, as he puts it. All these challenges the transgender people were facing as part of their lives, and the acceptance they don't always get, was told in what is overall a well done story with some nice acting and camera work. There's a couple of particular things I want to make a point of highlighting here. One is the care taken to talk about the sensitive topics of acceptance and rejection, transition, and legal rights. Some of the characters are found to be saying some transphobic comments, not accepting characters like Hikaru or the other trans characters that appear throughout it, not understanding their situations, but the actions are never portrayed as the right thing to do or as an acceptable position to have. The actions, by showing what can happen to trans people just for being true to themselves, are actively saying these actions are unacceptable, and that people should change to accept and accommodate trans people into daily lives and not treat them as an oddity, but as the same as anyone else. And in the process, it shows people who reject their existence, like Hikaru's father, and those who accept, like what he eventually does come to the end of the film, and the mother, the friends of Hikaru's who also accept, and other trans people whom she meets during the movie. It discusses problems related to the trans experience, if those are the right words to word this. Yet, at the same time, takes an angle that's different to the one most fictional commentaries take, and a one that, despite being all about what a trans person goes through while praying to be accepted by people, is not really a story that is just about a transgender individual defined by that. It's a story about family, about love, about life, taken from the perspective of a trans person, which in turn highlights the issues trans people face. The other point is the fact that transgender people were chosen to play the roles of trans people in the drama. While this may not sound like such a revolutionary idea, and really just sounds like common sense, this isn't a common thing that happens, and it's important to find that trans representation on TV that using trans people for trans roles allows. And also, by having these roles played by trans people, you can find that they can relate to their characters better and in turn perform better in the role. And you can find that in some of the quite nice acting that there is in the film. You find as a whole that this was an important bit of work, and one of the better examples you can find on TV of a transgender story with trans people in the leading roles that comes at an important time to further debate on the issue. It should be noted that while the show does have these positives, it falls in some of the pitfalls I mentioned prior with Kinpachi Sensei, and it really does push some heteronormative ideas of family and relationships instead of challenging narratives and the medicalization, which is also seen. There's constant visits to the hospital to fix Hikaru's problems, and one of the main things the mother does to convince the father is researching medical books and explaining to him about the existence of gender identity disorder over the story that Hikaru has to tell. Hikaru's character is also, in many, what society would expect of a woman. One who is good at cooking, helpful around the house, a very stereotypical gender role for a woman, instead of something more modern and different. Many of these problems are actually tackled directly by Last Friends, a 2008 TV drama that was very popular during its airing, getting 17.7% airing figures and winning countless awards for its story and acting. Now, the show wasn't necessarily about trans issues, unlike the other stories that I've covered up to this point in the series, with the story actually focusing on the problems of domestic violence that the character Michiru Aida begins to suffer from in her relationship with Sosuke Oikawa. Around the beginning of the show, Michiru bumps into a friend from her school days in Ruka Kishimoto, who is now a motocross racer trying to become a professional. Now, with Ruka's story arc that, by the time the show aired in 2008, offered one of the more complex views of transgenderism on Japanese TV. Ruka's character is introduced right from the off as quite a complex character, unsure as to who they are. The initial impression the viewer would get of Ruka is that they were close friends with Michiru during school, and also held unrequited love for her. They were really happy to be able to see her again, and were disappointed to find that they were with someone else in a relationship. The initial portrayal in this first episode, especially as it developed and accumulated in Ruka kissing and sleeping Michiru, depicts at least romantic interest on Ruka's part, but it's not necessarily suggested it is a homosexual love interest, and more that Ruka is in a confused and complex mental state about who they think they are. From here, the show goes on with Ruka privately researching gender clinics, and by the end of the show, interestingly unlike the previous examples, following either people about to transition in Tsurumoto Nao's case in Kinpachi Sensei, or a fully transitioned individual in the case of Hikaru in the previous TV movie, the show leaves Ruka's story of a case of gender identity ambiguity. I want to bring attention to a few particular moments, one of which is here in episode 4.
林田さんすぐに男だとか女だとかそういうこと言うのやめてくれます？私はレーサーです。女とかじゃなくてレーサーとして見てください。
それは無理だな。梨をリンゴだと思えってのと一緒だよ。お前女だもん。お前は優秀な女のレーサーだ。
Here they comment to their motocross coach to treat them not as a girl or a boy, but as a racer, but get dismissed. They're currently trying to understand themselves, and while trying to do so, find comments like the ones that their coach is saying uncomfortable. You can see this confusion with how they feel about themselves with the emotion when they go to a gender clinic about their thoughts on themselves. All of this just shows that Ruka's thoughts are trying to understand who they are. Then, in episode 7, when notes are placed outside the changing room of the motocross track noting Ruka has a man's heart in a woman's body, is hesitant when asked about the validity of the comments. While Ruka's development throughout the show is apparent, it's always confused and indecisive. For the best, I feel. By the time the finale occurs, Michiru, who near the end had been raped and conceived a baby that was Sosuke's, Ruka, and Takeru live together as a queer family unit, with Ruka's character seemingly finalised as a gender-neutral or gender-ambiguous member of this unit. What makes this important is how the previous examples I have mentioned contain the transgender narrative within an accepted gender binary structure, matching the mood within Japan at the time, even if, by excluding trans individuals who identified on a gender spectrum, it denied some of their validity. Not only does the resolution of Ruka's identity as being neither male or female open up to the Japanese public the idea that gender can be on a spectrum in such a popular show, it also shows alternate family units in the case of the one shown at the end of the series. While in many ways the dissolution of the traditional idea of a family unit involving a stay-at-home mother with a salaryman father with a job for life at a company looking after 2 children began to fall apart after World War II, especially during the 90s onwards after the bursting of the bubble economy Japan had enjoyed, alternate family structures, especially queer ones, were not generally regarded as a norm in society. Gay relationships, as I have previously mentioned, were specifically counted in transgender legislation within Japan, so that if someone transitions they could not remain married to the same lover if their new gender meant the marriage would be between 2 people of the same gender. For both of them to be tackled in such a popular drama in a way that tackled conventional societal norms is important for the increased acceptance for transgender people. Now that does begin to bring us to the end of this part of the video series. I do want to tackle one particular point before we head into the end of this video and then heading towards the final part of the video series, focusing more on the modern day. Now, while a lot of this video series has so far focused mainly on, for example, TV, variety shows or dramas, ignoring movies that tackle the subject, this is just because while there were some interesting ones on the subject, many were just on a smaller scale. And while this isn't necessarily a bad thing, it did mean that to the wider society and impact on day-to-day life, which these movies had, that is the focus of this video series, the impact was negligible, and therefore I haven't decided to cover it. There were also some interesting manga and book projects during this time, post the passing of the legislation. The obvious and most important one of these would arguably be Hara Musako, or Wandering Sun, a manga wrote by Shimura Takako that received an anime in 2011. And this is a one I want to focus on in more detail and is more relevant to the modern day situation that the final section will be discussing, which is why it's not been discussed yet. There were other books as well, such as Nomachi Minako's book adapted from a blog, O Kama Dakedo o El Yattemasu, which did give a detailed autobiographical take on the life of a woman through and post-transition. But a lot of the books, such as this one, just had sales that were relatively low and meant the book wasn't really on the radar for most people, meaning they did have little effect on public opinion and therefore weren't covered in this series for the same reason. Considering the show that I have discussed which did have an impact, and considering the public understanding of transgender issues did become more nuanced and considered a wider range of identities during this time, I feel that there was at least some progress in the hearts and minds of people, even if actual legislative change stalled.